Okay, so we're going to review a couple of common like design elements and some digital tools. First is a couple of notes about design. So this is also a little bit of review because I think we talked about this with modes already, is that readers read left to right here. Sorry, Western, we read left to right, top to bottom. So it is important to think about what you want people to see first and what's going to be reader friendly. People are going to look to the left first, so everything needs to make sense where you place it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute when we look at some examples. Digital text, remember, don't have to be linear. You can design and arrange your own content and make those choices. And linear just means, like, if you were writing a Google Doc, everything would be straight in one page. And you have noticed when you read online that links allow us to link lots of pages together, so things do not have to be linear. You can use, tables and columns and chunks, like some of the examples. Everything doesn't have to be like top to bottom. Okay, so a couple of design elements to consider. One is contrast. And I'm going to put kind of an emphasis and contrast are a little bit different, but I'm going to kind of talk about them together just to make it a little bit more, a little simpler. And then they're related also. Colors and images that contrast well are easy to read and help create emphasis. For example, black and white are easy to read. They contrast well. Red and black do not. If you've ever tried to read a website or a page that has a black background and red font, you have noticed that will make your eyes water. It's very hard to do because the colors don't contrast well. It's not reader friendly. You can also create contrast to help with emphasis. So for instance, if you're reading a magazine article, a lot of times they make that first letter of a paragraph larger and in a different color to emphasize that they're starting a new place. Quotes and, words and things, titles that you want people to really notice or pay attention to, you might, change the color, change the size, change the font, to help people kind of like pay attention to where they should be looking. Balance and proportion, again, a little different, but I'll talk about them together. We're coming back to that term we talked about at the beginning of the semester. We were going over content farms, visual weight, and paying attention to what it is you're putting the visual weight on. And we'll look at some examples of this, but you want to make sure, again, that the visual weight, a lot of visual weight is on the text. You don't have these boxes of really small font like shoved together, because that puts lots of visual weight on images, and not a lot of visual weight on the text, on the really important part. You want to keep in mind that the other modes are in your visual text in this academic piece. They're there to support and enhance the text, but they shouldn't be overpowering or distracting from it. And so whatever is going to draw your eye is considered heavier. So when we talked about content farms, we talked about the images and the ads are really what draw your eye. They're really what you pay the most attention to. And the text is sort of secondary, and you want to kind of avoid that mistake, and just pay attention to and make choices about what you're making heavier on the page, what you're really giving like preference and space to. You don't want to have a lot of visual weight given to white space. You want to make sure that things are getting into proportion, which is like size and like the size and ratio of your images and videos and graphs and how well they fit together. You don't want to have like these chunks over here with lots of white space and lots of like disproportionate use of space. So you just want to pay attention to whether or not things look off, whether or not things are distributed evenly and well spaced and easy to read, and people really are prompted to pay attention to what they're supposed to pay attention to. For example, like a large, single spaced chunk of text on the right and a giant chunk of white space beside it would be very bad balance and proportion, because it's not well spaced, it's not even, and you're not going to really be paying much attention to that text as much as the white space or the visuals. A couple more things. One is direction. Again, this comes back to reader friendliness, and just making sure that you know where you're supposed to look first. This comes back to the reading right, left to right and top to bottom, that people are aware where they're supposed to look when, and that you're giving them cues, especially in a digital space that's non-linear. I'm going to open up this one example, and this is actually an example of a very good essay content wise, and we did some revision with this also. I'm going to make this window just a little bit bigger so we can see this. But if you'll notice, as I'm scrolling down, here's the title, and then you have this example over here and a graph here, and then it gets down here. It's actually, as you're scrolling down, a little bit hard to tell, and we did talk about like adding this line in to make it a little bit easier to tell that you're supposed to be reading down one column all the way and then coming back up and reading the next. But that is a little bit hard to do, and it's tough to tell here whether I'm supposed to go over here and read down or whether I'm supposed to come down here. And that's an example of having to make a choice about direction and making sure readers know where they're supposed to go next. Okay. And this is one way. This is a web page example that I kind of want to show when it loads. So here's another essay that was designed to look like a web page to kind of raise awareness and help people kind of understand a problem that's taking place. So you can see one of the things that she did was kind of boxed everything off and used arrows and a lot of digital design to let you know and give cues about like where to look, topics she's covering. Even though things are boxed off, there's paragraphs in these sections, and the font is big enough to read and big enough to know that the emphasis is on the text, and the visuals are there to help. So this is a good like reader-friendly direction. Just get that back in place. Repetition is another thing that's really helpful. Don't get, I guess, too busy in terms of like giving lots of parts of your paper like entirely like refreshed design concepts. You want to pick some kinds of pattern and some kinds of rhythm. For instance, you want your headings to all follow kind of the same style. You don't want to have different fonts and different colors and questions for some and statements for other. I mean, you want to create some kind of rhythm, and especially in terms of design. Like if you're, doing that zigzag format that a lot of the examples do, where you have the section and then images and then switch and go back and forth, that's cool. Kind of stick with that. It's very reader friendly and helps readers actually follow your thoughts and follow when new sections are happening, when you're going into new ideas, when you've created some sort of rhythm and expectation. If you have a whole new way of designing each and every section without any sorts of patterns that you've created, it makes it a lot harder for readers to follow that. And then also harmony is kind of a given one. It's kind of when everything works well together. When we were talking about the Jaguar commercial early in the semester, we noted there were some funny things about it, and it did have, some things that were problematic in its use of, logic, because it was selling a car, but if you remember, it was selling the gorgeous lifestyle instead. But it's also an example of a text that actually has really good harmony. When we talked about like their choices in music and body language for the cast, in visuals and what they chose to show, and the narrator's voice, everything came together to create this sort of dreamlike effect, this fantasy, and everything, all of the modes, all of the design choices were there to support it, and it all came together really well and helped create the same effect. And that's a good example of harmony.